A few months ago, I was sitting in my therapist's office. We were talking about life-changing events, and she posed the question to me, what's the most traumatizing moment in your life? You see, she thought it was the moment when I had been sexually assaulted 4 years ago. But I surprised her when I looked at her and I said, it wasn't that. It was everything that happened the moment after I decided to report. This isn't a story about the details of that assault or about my rapist. This is a story about my plight for justice and how at every step of the way it was denied to me. As survivors were blamed for not reporting, bombarded with the allegation, if it was really rape, you would have gone to the police. But this is what happened when I went to the police. This is what happened when I reported. My name is Kitterman, and I am a survivor of sexual violence. But in November of 2016, I was just a student at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. I was entering my sophomore year in college, living in the bowling dorm room apartments, the worst apartments on campus. I had just returned from the Democratic National Convention as a delegate, the youngest elected in the state. Politics was my everything. It was where I found hope. It was where I found ambition, which is where he found me. He was a student at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, just 3 hours away from me. As I came back from Philly, he was packing his bags to go to Ohio, as he had just been elected for the Hillary Clinton campaign in Ohio. For the months leading up to the election, we chatted about politics, about what he was doing up there in Ohio, and built a friendship. And that friendship built a trust. And that trust was the reason I didn't hesitate to let him stay the night when he asked to. It was just after the election. He had no job anymore, and he was returning back to his undergrad at UAB, and he wanted to break up his trip from Ohio to Birmingham with a stay in Chattanooga. And so he came down. We had a few drinks, chatted. It was pretty much as normal a night as you'd expect with a friend. When I woke up the next morning, I didn't find myself by a friend, but by the man raping me. I didn't fight. I didn't run away. I froze. And it was as much a physical battle for me as it was a mental battle. I was laying on my side, and I could see a picture on my desk. It was a picture of my then boyfriend and I in a restaurant in Chicago, and he couldn't see me as I was on my side. And I uttered a small prayer just to be consumed by that picture, just to be taken in and to become that boy who was sitting in that restaurant looking out at the Chicago skyline. But my prayer wasn't answered, and I returned to my dorm room, being raped. It was like on autopilot that I eventually just sat up, and I stared at the man who was now my rapist in the eyes. There wasn't really much to be said after that. He picked up his bag and left me in my room. I really couldn't go far. I ended up on the floor by my bed. I didn't want to sit in the same bed where it had happened. I tried calling my boyfriend for help, but every single time I called, the call would be rejected. And I got a text message saying he had thought I cheated, that he wouldn't support me until I proved to him that it wasn't cheating that I did. I tried to call my friend, and he thought he was helping me when he called the university on my behalf. Just a few minutes after it happened, I got a knock on my door from a resident director who told me that I needed to report what had happened. I didn't know it was optional. It was as though I was confessing a sin that wasn't mine. I had to prove myself and justify my victimhood before I could even understand the very actions that made me one. Because my perpetrator attended a different university in Birmingham, the best UTC could do is ban him from campus. But UAB wanted to pursue their own investigation. He was, after all, their student, and he was returning to a campus full of potential victims. A rapist anywhere poses a threat everywhere. And so I was asked to go along with their investigation. And for over a semester, I testified for hours. I brought witnesses. I produced evidence. And finally, I remember I was walking in the parking garage at UTC. And I remember it because it was the few times I was able to actually find parking on the campus. And my phone vibrated. I turned the phone over, and it was the results of the investigation from UAB. And by the words, non-consensual sexual intercourse, non-consensual sexual contact, and sexual harassment was the word bolded, responsible. My rapist was found responsible, and he was suspended. Now, Title IX, which is the federal civil rights law that allows for perpetrators to, that allows for colleges to investigate these crimes of sexual violence, allows for perpetrators to appeal. And my rapist immediately appealed this, and it was brought to a hearing panel. And the day before, a few days before the hearing panel, I looked up to see who would actually be the people trying my case. And out of the 4 people that'd be hearing what I had to say, 3 of them were my rapist friends. 3 of them were friends with him on Facebook, commenting on his posts, liking his statuses, were the bosses of departments that he worked at. I was going into a hearing panel vulnerable to a hearing panel that had already had their votes prepared for my rapist, despite them signing documents alleging no conflicts of interest. And I complained, and the hearing panel was changed. You can't trust the system after you clearly have found them stacking the justice system against you. Now, this new jury, this new hearing panel, found my rapist responsible again. And then my rapist started launching lawsuit threats against me, against his university. I didn't think that it would scare them enough to do what they did. This final appeal went to the highest office at UAB, the Vice President of Student Affairs, the Dr. John R. Jones III. And just after receiving that appeal from him, I received a letter from Dr. Jones, in a short letter that couldn't even fill the whole page, telling me that the whole case was dismissed, that my rapist was allowed to go back to campus. It was July. I had wasted 7 months of my life. I had lost myself. I had put away college. I had dropped out of school just to focus on making sure that what happened to me would never happen to someone again, and ultimately it was dismissed. Unbeknownst to myself, just 10 days after my sexual assault, 10 days, UAB had changed their Title IX policy to prohibit non-students from reporting their students for acts of sexual violence. Just 10 days. They first said that they had the jurisdiction. They proceeded with this lengthy investigation. They tried to stack the jury against me. But then when they realized they couldn't win, they changed the games. They changed the rules of the game. I couldn't do anything. I tried to fight back. I think I tried to fight back mostly because, I wanted to prove to myself that, unlike that fateful morning, I could actually fight back, that I wasn't just someone who froze. I reached out to Lambda Legal, GLAD, HRC, and where I wasn't ignored, I was denied. I mean, it sucks to get denied by the ACLU. It really sucks. I framed the denial letter because I thought it was like some great feat of mine. When I tried to seek legal representation from private attorneys, I was sent out the door when I couldn't afford a $25,000 retainer. A life as a public cashier it's not that lucrative of a position. So I gave up. There was nothing I could do. I couldn't afford justice. Until, for what I understood to be the first time, a nationwide activist group called End Rape on Campus had emailed me and said something that I hadn't heard. We believe you. With their help, I filed a 95-page complaint against the University of Alabama at Birmingham to the United States Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. This 95-page complaint was opened in March of 2018, alleging severe violations of Title IX and corruption. This marked the 3rd federal investigation at its time in the past 3 years that was opened by the government into UAB. I was connected with journalists at the Tab and BuzzFeed, and for once the story that I thought was taken away from me, reported without me knowing, was now mine to give to someone. Now, as I became more public about my story, I also tried to start retreating back to a private life. It was really exposing. But publicizing my story taught me 2 things. 1, that I'm not alone as a rape victim, and 2, that my rapist didn't stop with me. Now, like insects swim around light, wherever power exists, so too will predators. In our workplaces or our homes, power is the host to the parasite that is the predator. And nowhere was that light stronger than when my rapist returned to politics. As I was retreating, he was entering back the same area where he had met me, where he had lured me in. I had heard he was using that platform and his political positions to find other people and do the same things he did to me, to them. And when I learned that he had been hired as a campaign manager for a state house race in Alabama, I really did have to think about whether I should call that candidate or not. To me, it was a public safety uh, report. Uh, and so I did eventually call that candidate, a Jim Toomey. I told him what happened to me. I told him I'm not trying to look for publicity. I'm not trying to look for any controversy. I just wanted to make sure that the pain that I was going through would never happen to anybody else in politics. And I thought I had a decent conversation with the man until a few weeks later, after I provided him all the evidence, all the testimony, I received an email that said, "I don't find you credible. Don't contact me further." I just wanted myself and the voice of the survivors after me heard. More than anything, I wanted someone else to see what I saw, that I was part of a larger pattern of abuse by my attacker, and that he could actually be stopped. But ultimately, Jim Toomey, like everyone else throughout this process, couldn't be bothered to act. Rather than accepting the facts as they were given to him, he chose a path of convenience that saved his time, and more specifically, saved his campaign manager. I hit a dead end. I couldn't do any more. I did my best to try to save other people. I tried to build my life back up. I picked up a new job, found an apartment off campus, and I thought I'd be comfortable until I started receiving text messages. They were several text messages all day, all night, harassing me, saying I was a liar, sending me pictures of a cartoon woman being bound and gagged. No matter how many times I said, "Stop, who is this?" or blocking the number, I get another text from a new number. It was endless, and I felt trapped. I did what I was blamed for never having done in the first place after that. I went to the police. It was the last resort option for me. Walking into the Chattanooga Police Department lobby, I was scared for what it meant to have to be a victim in a police lobby. I asked to speak to a police officer, and an officer, Scott Lee, came out to take my statement. I wanted a private room. I wanted someplace that wasn't in front of every single person waiting in the police lobby, but it wasn't given to me. So, in front of everybody, I told the details of how I was raped, what I was going through, the trauma that I had experienced, the disbelief that I had faced at every single time I tried to receive justice, the text messages and how I thought they were related to my rapist. At the end of it all, the police officer looked at me and said, "How do you consider this harassment?" It wasn't that I was disbelieved. It was that CPD didn't care. And CPD didn't like the fact that I didn't call them immediately after I had been raped in the first place. But what I'll tell you, and what I told them, is that I didn't know I had been raped. I had no words in that moment to describe what I just went through. It was just a moment of shock where I couldn't process in my mind what had just happened to my body. I went there for protection, and I left utterly protectionless. I was vulnerable to this man who could text me, who could reach me however he wanted, and nothing could be done to stop them, even though I told the police that I had a suspect in mind, and I gave them the evidence I had. In the police report, they said that there was not enough evidence to merit a suspect or an investigation. And so I decided to investigate on my own. I decided to find out who this person was. I found out that the text messages were being originated from an app company called TextMe Incorporated, a San Francisco-based company. This app would allow someone to generate multiple different numbers and anonymously send text messages masking their real number. And so I filed a subpoena against that text messaging company and found the geolocation of exactly where those text messages were being sent from. I chased it down to Birmingham, Alabama, and then using public records, I was able to figure out that my rapist had been living in that same area. Though like the curtain was drawn back, it didn't really make me feel better, because now I knew all along what had been happening. I was still being victim to the man that had victimized me now 3 years ago. I saw my case. I had no support from law enforcement. I had a final trick up my sleeve. I had a friend in the mayor's office, and I thought about my sisters going into that CPD lobby and how they'd be treated. I didn't have any hope for my case. I didn't have any hope that any arrest would be made. But I emailed that mayor, and I told him exactly everything that happened to me, how I went in, how I was disbelieved, how I was cast out, how I went in as a victim of a crime and left even more of a victim. I didn't expect anything from that. I had learned real quick not to expect anything from people as a survivor. But I hope this email would make the next survivor walking into that police lobby more respected. Being treated as an early morning inconvenience by the police was happening to me. It was happening all across the city. After everything I went through, I really didn't expect anything to happen. I'd proven myself at every step of the way. I had met the legal threshold to be a rape victim. The people, however, time and again, proved themselves to be a confederacy of rape apologists. Everything in my life fell apart. When I hit send on that email to the mayor's office, I had the scars from when I had been cutting myself, burning myself. I hated myself. I indulged in self-harm because every cut seemed to be like a distraction from the constant pain. That was the loneliness. And though it hurt, it felt cathartic just to have a distraction from worrying about when that next text was going to come through and knowing there was nothing I could do about it. I was failing all my classes. I was broke. I still am broke. And I had more hatred for myself than the man who took my body away from me. And all I ever wanted was to be believed. That one email to the mayor's office actually sparked a fire in my case. Immediately, the man who cast me away at the police was put under internal investigation, and a detective was assigned to my case. And all the credit that I had done to investigate my own case was now claimed by the police. They had tracked down the IP address that was used to send the text messages, found it was my rapist. In a few weeks, a warrant was signed, and he was charged, booked, and arrested. But it all fell back on me. It was incumbent on myself, a victim, a student, to research my own case. Despite getting millions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, to solve crimes and protect victims, the police did nothing to protect me or resolve my case. The work fell on me. There's such a high cost in reporting. You hear my story and you may see strength and resiliency. You may point to my story as the threshold to which survivors must fight to actually be heard. What those police officers didn't hear and what every investigator, media personnel, and political candidate wasn't made aware of was how much I hated myself in this process. I lost myself to the justice systems that harmed me more irrevocably than a 10-minute rape that happened on a chilly November morning. 3 years because of 10 minutes. Where policies didn't step up to save my case, neither did the people. Neither did the people charged with enforcing those policies. At every step of my journey as a survivor, I took up the mantle as investigator, forensic analyst, attorney, and advocate. I was so utterly alone. Survivors shouldn't have to peddle their story to the highest elected officials in the government, whether it be a mayor or to the U.S. Department of Education, because those at the lowest levels did not take them seriously. Anyone should be able to walk into that police station and be offered water or coffee, a private place to recount your case with an officer, but most importantly, they should be met with belief. In each instance, I had to lobby, whether it was a school, a police department, a political candidate, to be treated fairly. The due process I was constitutionally guaranteed was subverted for the sake of political convenience. During my years-long search for justice, I was told by the ADA, who eventually would be prosecuting my harassment case. He said, "Your story is very odd. It's very unique." And I disagreed with him. You know, I sit on the shoulders of millions of survivors before me and alongside me who have faced injustice not only by the people who have violated us, but by the people who shielded them. I couldn't hire an attorney because it was too expensive. UAB would not suspend a rapist because they were scared my rapist would sue them. Jim Toomey would not recognize and stop the predation. His campaign platform was providing a rapist because his rapist was on his payroll and he was helping them. The police would not investigate my case because they didn't think there was enough evidence for a suspect. I now understand why that person told me my story was unique. It wasn't that my pain could only be felt by myself or that the details of my case were peculiar. No. It was because I didn't stop fighting. At every instance, I was told my fight was lost. Justice for me will look differently for justice for you. The crux of justice isn't with a newspaper article or a mugshot. You define how you'll receive justice, and it is the duty and responsibility of our friends, our workplaces, our university, our government to provide that path for you. So now what? The answer is now you. As much as I'd like to use my time talking about policy and advocating for bills and reform, where we go now is entirely incumbent on you. You have the capacity to change the story for the survivors right now being denied justice. The power you have to listen and to acknowledge the pain that we're going through is a weapon against even the most vilest crimes in this world. My story is scattered with corruption, even more than what I was able to tell you today, with less than a handful of people who cared. But you are a door of opportunity for survivors. Let my story be a testament of what Me Too stories should never have to come to. Your presence in a survivor's life can make or break their path to healing. I'm one of those faces behind the words Me Too. It's not a face you usually see. I would say this now to bring you three words that hold immeasurable power that I wish I could have heard a little more often. You may not see the impact of them. Every survivor deserves to hear it. But know in your heart that you saved a life saying them. I believe you.